Hello and welcome to day 47. We are looking at Leviticus 26 through 27 and Acts 23 today. Our Leviticus reading starts with, "There shall be no idols." Now, for a lot of us, we don't really have a lot of idols hanging around in our lives these days, or so we think. We don't have little statues that we sit down and pray to or leave food for or light incense and candles in front of. So a lot of us are like, yeah, this isn't applying to me. I think when we read this section, though, we have to think about what are the idols in our life today? What are the things that are important to us? What are the things that we give money to, time, and attention to? What are the things that we value in our life that we think are critical to our life moving forward? The types of places we go because we trust it or we get information that is important to our lives. So, some of the things that are idols, I think, for some of us. You know, some of us really turn to social media a lot. We follow influencers a lot. We make our economic decisions. We decide how we dress and behave based on influencers. There are other um, social media outlets like Spotify. There are some people who put a huge amount of time into getting the right playlists going and really are curating a sound for their life that they are in charge of, they are in control of, and that they put together. Credit scores have really become something that people use as a way of valuing others. What is your credit score? And the world differentiates among people based on credit scores. Whether you get a house, a car, all sorts of things depend on our credit scores. So this is a way that we define people. And there are people that, there are whole apps that you can get to just make your credit score better. Of course, many of us turn to political or business leaders as people that we respect and look up to, that we listen to, that we obey. Um, what about our cars, our homes, and our school districts? The choices we make on these say so much about the image that we're trying to project into the community, the things that we value. Some of us will move, some of us will drive long distances just to have our kids in a certain school district. I think all of these things could be idols in our life. They may not necessarily play that role, but some of us, these things really take on a huge role in our lives that I think in some ways could be similar to the role that idols took. So we need to be thinking, where do we put our trust? Who do we obey? Who changes our behavior? Who tells us to do something and we do something differently because of what they said? This should be God that we are changing behavior for, not necessarily some of these other places. There's a beautiful line in here, "I'll be your God and you will be my people." I love the personal commitment that God is making to us here. I'm going to stand by you, God says. I'm going to be here. I'm going to walk in your neighborhoods. I'm going to know what's going on in your life. But do we make the same personal commitment to God? Are we saying, I'm going to be here for you, God? I'm going to show up. I'm going to pray. I'm going to be looking out for you. And I think this is one of those places that we have to really think about. Are we an equal partner? Are we bringing the same amount of commitment that God is bringing to this relationship? Another thing that I think we have to think about is a bunch of people have really emphasized who is the chosen people. And there are definitely groups of Christians that have made this to be a really exclusive group, that certain people are in the chosen people group and certain people aren't, based on some passages from Revelation and other places like there's a book, and if your name's in it, you're in. If your name's not in it, you're not in. But as you read through the entire Bible, especially when you're going through the prophets, it's clear that God is always opening the circle up wider. The groups of people that are God's chosen is always growing bigger and bigger. It's not just the people of Israel, it's also the people of Egypt and Assyria when you read through Isaiah. It's also the Gentiles, which is everyone who's not Jewish, which you could argue that's the entire rest of the world. We need to be careful that we don't look at this and say, God has limited the number of people that God is going to be the God of. God is always looking to have more people involved and included. God is saying that we need to be following the commandments, and that is how God will be blessing us. And when God is saying the commandments, we don't need to be thinking about all 600 some laws in the Old Testament. But when you look at all of it, Jesus says, love the God, Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This covers everything. Within that, we're looking at hospitality. How do we care for strangers and people we don't know? Generosity. How do we share the resources that God has given us? Um, Compassion. How do we reach out to marginalized people, to foreigners, to people who are new, who don't feel like they have a place to belong? All of this is what the commandments are. We are to live with compassion. We are to live with generosity. We are to live with hospitality. And when we just think about those three things as how we love our neighbor, we can really see the expansion of what the commands are and what makes God happy. A lot of us want to skip the next section where it talks about all the punishments, but instead of thinking about the punishments here, let's think about it in terms of consequences. When we don't do what God asks us to live with compassion, to live with generosity, to live with hospitality for our neighbors, there are consequences for our choices. God has given us free will and we can make choices, but things happen because of our choices. And it's clear that some of the stuff that happens is a consequence that comes from God. You could say a punishment because we have not been following the behaviors that God is asking of us. So the outcomes are determined by our choices. We have a choice, but we often have to live with results of our choices. The final section of the reading goes back to economics and is talking about Jubilee years. How much is a person worth? How much is property worth? And how to calculate that when a Jubilee year is coming up. All of this reminds us that the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. God is the creator of the entire universe. God was here before us. God will be here after us. We don't own anything forever. We don't own a person. We don't own land. At this point, we've set aside all slavery, that we don't think there's ever a point when a person should own another person. But as you're reading through here, you see slavery is not forever. Property ownership is not forever. This is God's resources, and God loans it to us for a period of time for us to use it to care for ourselves, to care for others, and to honor God. The final section here is tithing. Give a tenth of everything that you produce to God. You get 90% of the resources that you've been given, but God asks you to set 10% aside. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, this is a rule of the Old Testament we should set aside. This is still a really healthy rule for us today. If we can all live on less than our means, we all have healthier, happier lives. If we all share a portion, then those people who don't have enough will be able to have enough when we share and don't let all the resources accumulate with just a few people. When we switch to looking at Acts here today, the whole chapter of Acts here is really looking at how is Paul in trouble once again. The Romans are trying to protect Paul because he's a Roman citizen. Different Jewish leaders are really angry and want Paul dead. And so the Romans end up protecting Paul as a Roman citizen. The story continues on, but the thing that I want us to think about is, who are we willing to protect? Who needs protection in our lives? What kind of protecting do they need? The Romans were willing to step out and put themselves between the conspirators who were trying to murder Paul and try to protect him. Now, we may not have as dramatic a situation that we're being called to protect someone in to actually protect them from murder, but there's a lot of people that need protection from poverty, protection from illness, all sorts of support services that make their lives better. Who are the people that we are willing to fit time into our lives to care for them and protect them? I think this is a really challenging question, and I think it goes back to obeying the commandments that God has given us. And God has commanded us to care for the people in need. And this is a place where the Romans are showing us we need to take the time to protect people in need. We will see you next time. Continue your reading. Thanks so much.